Good evening, TUSD colleagues. Thank you for joining this evening. I'm super excited to see that we have over 100 participants already. My hope was that as many of my colleagues would be joining this evening as we work to build resilience and positivity in our lives, especially during this time with so much uncertainty. I'm a good listener, and I listened to two of my closest colleagues in Stanislaus County, Dr. Terry Metzger and Brenda Smith, both neighboring superintendents, and they were excited to share with me how much of a difference that Dr. Lauren Hodges was making for themselves and their staffs. And so I may be late to this game, but better late than never. And I'm super excited to welcome Dr. Lauren Hodges to TUSD to share her wisdom and influence all of us greatly. I know many of you I've spoken to in terms of how important our mental well-being is for ourselves and our students. And rumor may be that, you know, your needs or our needs have fallen on deaf ears. I promise you they have not. We've listened, we've responded, and in response, we brought Dr. Hodges to TUSD for the remainder of the school year for a number of stakeholders and in a number of venues. We're here because we believe in the us and TUSD. This is one more opportunity for us to support our changes, our anxiety, and most importantly, the call to pivot when necessary. And all of you have been champions in this on behalf of TUSD students. So with that, I'd like to welcome Dr. Lauren Hodges to TUSD. I have no doubt she's going to impact all of our lives personally and professionally over the coming months. Welcome, Laura.
Thank you, Dana. I appreciate it. And good evening, everybody. I feel very honored to be here, and thanks for the introduction. I appreciate that. You know, before we begin, I just want to let you know that I am on this chat. I'm watching it closely. So if you have any comments, want to talk to each other on there, share, share answers to questions that I might pose, and ask me any questions. I'd prefer you put them in the chat, but I am watching both the Q&A and the chat, just so you know. This will take about an hour, so just to give you that heads up. And, just to give you a little bit of context, I'm a performance coach and I am a consultant and I'm an instructional designer. I have an EDD in curriculum design, and I have been in the health and wellness industry for 15 years. I really, from the bottom of my heart, just taking off that professional hat for a second as a parent, want to tell you how much I appreciate what you are doing and how you are serving our children right now. I have an 11 and 10-year-old boy, 6th grade and 4th grade, and to watch the teachers in our school and what they're dealing with and how they are still serving and showing up and supporting, I am absolutely in awe of you. So thank you so much. And tonight is really about you. This is not about your job per se, although we're going to talk about how it influences your job. But please, for the next hour, put away, anything, any to-dos, your screens, like your cell phone, anything like that, and just really invest in yourself for the next hour. I promise you it will be worth it. I also, hope and expect that you're going to take away just something small, something that resonates. This is a webinar series, and this is just the kickoff for it. And I'll explain a little bit more in a second. Before I begin and really dive into what we're going to talk about, I have a question for you. I want you to tell me, I'm going to show you two of my friends. These are Jerry and Michael, two friends of mine. And I want you to tell me lately, this school year, on your typical drive or login to work, which of these two men do you most resonate with? Okay, this is Jerry. Let me show you Jerry first. Is this you on your drive to work lately and your experience of work lately? This is Jerry. So excited, huh? Excited to get to all those emails and new expectations, updates from the district, joyful, energetic, stress-free. Or is this you? This is my friend Michael.
No, God! No, God, please, no! No! No!
gets old, does it? Michael never gets old. So which one are you? Are you more Jerry or are you more Michael lately? Hopefully a lot of you can say Jerry, but the reality is a lot of us are more Michael these days. Some of us, I love it. You guys are coming in. A lot of Jerrys. Way to show up, Tarlac. Some of you might resonate with Jerry in the morning, like you're Jerry on your way to work, and then work kind of happens. And then toward the end of the day, you turn into a little bit more of a Michael. Some of you are more Michael in the morning. And then after a couple hundred cups of coffee, you turn into more Jerry. A lot of people say that they fluctuate between a Jerry and a Michael throughout the day, depending on the time of day, depending on the situation, what's going on. And a lot of people, for the most part, this is what I get reports of with all the leaders that I work with, both in the education field and in the corporate world. I mostly get that people are, they start their day Jerry. And then as the day wears on, they turn into more Michael, and they tend to go home to the people that really matter, their family, more Michael. That tends to be the norm. And what I'm here to tell you is that, for the next hour, is that it doesn't have to be that way, even in extraordinary times like this, because we are truly living and working in extraordinary times. I can't imagine that you are going to face a tougher expectation and moment in your career than this. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but I think this is probably going to be it. And I'm here to tell you that even in extraordinary times, we have the capability to be Jerry more of the time. Maybe not all of the time. I can't promise you all of the time. I wish there was that magic pill. But I can promise you, Jerry, a little bit more of the time. And that's really what we're here to do. What if you could be Jerry 10% more of the time at a time like this? That would be wonderful, right? And so that's what we're going to be working on, is identifying strategies and tools to be able to do that. What it really comes down to at the end of the day is, how are you managing the energy that you have? How can we increase that energy? And one of the things that we can do is we can start to understand stress and learn how to manage it through that understanding. Part of that process is learning how to understand yourself under stress, which is going to be our second webinar, is completely diving into stress awareness when it comes to you and then how you relate to others. So in this webinar series and the small group huddles, which I'll explain at the end of the webinar what those are, that's what we're going to be doing, is really diving into all of these different strategies on self-care. We're going to get to know our physical, mental, emotional, and even spiritual selves in this process, and learn how to become more resilient educators, right? And I don't just mean resilient in that we bounce back after a tough time. I want to help us learn how to thrive through, not just bounce back and give everything we have now and drain ourselves completely and then come out the other end and survive it. No. We want to learn how to thrive through it. And that's a completely different thing. That's called agility and resilience, right? And so that's what we're going to be doing in this series. I'm really, really excited that we get to do this together. We have quite a few webinars to cover, and quite a few topics to cover. So this particular topic that we're going to cover today is all of the fundamentals. I'm going to cover what I've identified as 5 fundamentals of stress and resilience. This is based on the past 20, 30 years worth of research in stress and resilience and in performance. And when I say the word performance, I'm not talking about your technical performance at work. I'm talking about the way that you show up personally and professionally, how you live out your best life personally and professionally. And so we're going to cover those 5 fundamentals right now. I'm going to stop and ask you questions here and there. And throughout this webinar, you're going to see on the slides some kind of stop and reflect sections. Those are actually for you to take with you afterward. We're going to send you the slide deck in a PDF, and you're going to be able to dive in. Good timing here, because we're about to hit that holiday season where you get just a smidge of downtime. And it can be a really good time to stop and reflect on some of the questions you're going to see. Okay. So deep breath, buckle up. We're going to start on our 5 fundamentals of performance and resilience. The first thing we're going to do is a little teeny tiny exercise. You can feel free to throw this on the chat, but I want you to take a piece of paper right now, and I want you to just write down One thing bringing you stress. I know that you can bring me a laundry list. I know you can. I know I can write one right now too, but just one thing. And the reason is I want something tangible and physical that you can use to reflect on and weigh against when I'm talking about this big concept of stress. I want something that you can picture for yourself. So write that one thing down, whatever it might be, the deadline, a worry, a thought that you keep thinking over and over. Could be shopping for Christmas gifts at the last second, whatever it is that's stressing you out right now. And hold on to that for me, because we're going to be coming back to it over and over. And I see a couple of people throwing it on the chat there. That's great. All right. So fundamental number one, and I promise we're going to come back to that one thing here in a second. Fundamental number one of stress and performance. We draw our energy and performance from multiple pathways. This is a really critical fundamental. And the reason I put it first is because it's going to help us get a little bit of context around our energy. And what I mean by multiple pathways is that we are multidimensional beings. We draw our energy in different ways. I've broken that down to 3 different ways: body, mind, and spirit. Let's break those down for just a second. So when I talk about your body pathway, and this is going to be its own webinar, so I'm not going to dive in too deeply right now. When I talk about your body pathway, as you can imagine, what I'm really referring to is your physical energy. This is the way that you physically support your health and well-being. I'm talking about, when I say physical energy, the way that you nurture your body with nutritious foods or not. We can all kind of attest to how we feel after a meal that is really healthy, well-balanced, well-portioned, and how you're able to show up, how you focus, how you perform at work, how connected you feel to others, how healthy and happy and joyful you might feel, versus when you have a meal that is either high in sugar or high in processed foods, maybe out of the vending machine, or maybe you're overfull because you ate too much, or you skipped a meal. And how do you show up differently when you have a meal that's not nutritious or doesn't serve you well, isn't worthy of you? Big difference between the two. This has an immediate impact on your energy, for better or for worse. It's also about how you move your body and how you exercise your body, which are 2 completely different things, right? We can exercise 5 days a week, and we can sit at a desk for 8 hours a day, and that can significantly impact our energy and even our cognition and our mood, etc. And vice versa. We can move around all day on that classroom, but if we're not getting regular exercise, again, it can impact our mental health and our well-being, our energy, our cognition, etc. And then the last part of that body pathway is how we rest and recover our body at night, how you're sleeping. I guarantee you, if I took a poll right now and I asked who was getting 7 to 9 hours of quality sleep per night, I can almost bet that about 25% of you would report back, yes, you're getting 7 to 9 hours of quality sleep per night. The rest of you would report no. And the reason I say that is the national average is about 25% of us getting the right amount and quality of sleep. The rest of us, not so much. Again, sleep quality and quantity, direct impact on our energy, our ability to show up, our cognition, et cetera, and our ability to regulate our mood and regulate our stress, manage it. So these are the body pathway elements that we're going to cover in their own webinar form. And then we have our mind pathway. Our mind pathway is about how we manage our mental energy. So this one can be quite challenging, particularly at a time like this. When I say manage our mental energy, I'm referring to how are we managing the mental clutter that is the result, A, of being a teacher, an educator in the first place, and B, an educator in COVID times. With so many multiple competing priorities, expectations, to-dos, things to think about, new skills you had to acquire so quickly, all of the personal worries that you have. How are you managing all of that mental clutter? What are you doing about that? How are you quieting the mind? And it's also about that mind pathway is also about How are you managing your mindset and your perspective? That is a critical component. It's actually going to be its own fundamental shortly here. But how are you managing your mindset? Because two people can look at the same issue or crisis. One can say, we're never going to get through this. And the other can say, we're going to get through this and we're going to be stronger because of it. Who's going to have a better experience of that crisis? And that's where you can kind of see mindset becoming a very critical component to your experience of stress and resilience. So we'll cover that again in its own webinar. And then there's that spirit pathway. When I say spirit pathway, I don't necessarily mean your religion or your faith life, although that's certainly a component of our spiritual energy and well-being. What I really mean by this is your sense of why, your sense of meaning, purpose in your life, and how aligned you are with that. This is a very, very important pathway. And a lot of times people generally fall into two categories. First category is that they have a very clear sense of why and meaning and purpose. They can tell you right off the bat, yeah, this is what I live for. And then there's another category, not so clear, maybe haven't worked that out yet. We can help you figure that out, right? I'm actually going to give you some questions to think about if you kind of fall into that category. The question I would have for the people in the first category, even if you do have a clear sense of purpose and meaning, are your day-to-day actions and behaviors aligned with that? Or are they not? And if you are off trajectory right now, which by the way is quite normal and okay, if you are off trajectory, how can we get you back on? How can we course correct you to get better alignment between your day-to-day actions and behaviors and thoughts and emotions and your sense of meaning and purpose and anchoring you in that? So those are your three pathways. They're all deeply interrelated. One influences the other. Good question to ask yourself, where am I strong and where am I weak? Right? When I do this in person, when I have like an all-day workshop, I make people walk to corners of the room and talk about that. And it gets into some really deep and interesting conversations. So where can you leverage your greatest strength, which pathway to influence and work on that pathway that maybe isn't so strong? So that's fundamental number one. Fundamental number two, we're going to dive into some science here, like middle school science. So middle school science teachers, apologies in advance for me butchering brain science for just a second here, okay? We're going to dive into a little bit of stress science because I am a firm believer that once we understand the biology behind stress, we can better manage it. We can take better control of it. So here's fundamental number two. Stress in and of itself, our experience of physiological stress, is a biological chemical reaction that is out of our control. How we respond to stress is within our control. I'm going to get to the second part in a little bit here, but let's dive in and break this first part apart. So stress is a biological chemical reaction out of our control. If you look at the screen, the brain on the screen right here, you can see that I've kind of trisected it into three general areas. In the bottom part, that red part, you can see that it's called the reptilian brain. That part of the brain, from an evolutionary perspective, is the oldest part of the brain. Its sole function is to keep us alive. It is our fight or flight central, okay? Its sole job is to scan the world for threat and react accordingly using something called our stress response, or it's also known as your sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems or autonomic nervous system. So that reptilian brain, that's its sole function. It's called the reptile brain because reptiles only have this part of the brain. So I am sorry to tell you that reptiles don't have feelings, emotional feelings. And then we have our limbic brain. Mammals have this part of the brain. And the limbic brain is where you feel emotion. The limbic brain is where a long-term memory sort of lives down there. And also emotional regulation is in this part of the brain. So these two, limbic brain and reptile brain, actually work together to bring about what I was referring to as the stress response. And then at the top here, you can see that we have our neocortex, or what I like to call the high performance hub. So this is the newest part of the brain. It's what separates us humans from our mammal friends. And this is where high performance happens. This is where we get logic, reason, critical thinking, focus, rationale, decision-making, creativity, innovation, abstract thought. All of that happens in that high performance hub. That's also where you get your executive function, attentional control, those things. So let's talk about this stress response for a second. I'm going to use an example that all of us can relate to, but you also have that one that you wrote down. I'm going to use the example that we're all driving on a highway, or I'm driving on a highway, and a truck pulls out in front of me and darn near hits me, and I have to slam on my brakes. And it's really scary, right? He almost hits me. In that moment, my reptile brain will react instantly. And that is that stress is a biological reaction out of our control. The stress response will activate. So let me show you what that looks like. The stress response is that autonomic nervous system, and it's activating this left side of the screen, sympathetic nervous system. So in that moment, a bunch of different kind of chemical biological reactions occur at the same time. The first thing I want you to pay attention to, in that instant, first thing that happens, and I'm going to go back a slide, 30% of the blood flow of your brain pools to the bottom of your brain into that reptile brain. And where is that coming from? High performance hub. All right. So the first thing I want you to notice is that 30% of your blood flow pools to the bottom of the brain. And instantly, in that moment, you are cognitively impaired. You are no longer able to think rationally, think critically, and again, use automatic kind of responsive, self-regulatory thoughts and behaviors. A couple of other things happen in that moment. Another thing is that your immune function tanks, right? Any non-essential functions to life are going to be reduced in that moment or suppressed. Another thing that happens, digestive system goes down the drain, right? That's why a lot of times when you're in a stress response or you're feeling stressed out about something, you get that pit in your stomach or that sinking feeling. It's why a lot of people who are chronically stressed have chronic IBS or chronic digestive issues, or they get ulcers. It's also because of the immune suppression, why they get sick more often or are more susceptible to diseases, particularly chronic diseases like heart disease, type 2 diabetes, even some forms of cancer. And then another thing that happens is that we get this cascade of adrenaline and cortisol that floods the system. And we don't want sustained cortisol secretion through the body, right? Because that's that stress hormone. So those are a bunch of things that happen all at the same time. I slam on my brakes, right? The truck passes. And in that moment, that fight or flight kicks in as well. If I'm a fighter, I'm going to react differently than if I'm a flighter. Some of us kind of are different based on our upbringing, our past experiences, even our DNA. And, if I'm a fighter, I'm probably going to have different kinds of emotions like anger. I'm probably going to behave a little differently, like maybe a finger out the window. If I'm a flighter, I'm probably going to be more fear-based and retreat inward. And I'm probably going to be really scared, right, in that moment. When the moment passes, and we're going to get into that stress personality in our second webinar. When that moment passes and I survive it, then what is called our parasympathetic nervous system activates. It's the balancing arm of our sympathetic nervous system. I take a deep breath. Whew, I survived. When I take that deep breath and that parasympathetic nervous system activates, a neurotransmitter called acetylcholine is secreted, and that is designed to calm the heart rate and bring me back to homeostasis. Blood flow responds back into the new part of the brain. And now I start to get that hindsight is 2020. I start to be reflective. I start to gain control of my thoughts and my behaviors again. Here's the problem. A threat is a threat is a threat. And our body cannot determine the difference between an actual threat to our survival, a truck pulling out in front of us, and a perceived threat, like worry about the health of your family, or parents not using the resources and tools you've put forth, right? Or making sure you have everything ready for the holidays, or an email in your inbox with all caps that says urgent, new protocol. Now, all of those things are stressful. I'm not trying to take that away from you, but I want you to recognize that your brain can't distinguish between the two, and it's going to react no matter what. That's the key. It is a biological reaction out of your control. But remember the second part of that fundamental, your response is within your control. So what can you do about it, right? This is the part that's important. There's a couple of things we can do to better manage stress. Number one, we can work to reduce the refractory period between reaction and response. And if we can start to close that gap, we can start to gain better control over the stress in our life. And that's what we're going to be learning in these webinars, is all these tools to do so. And there's a second thing we can do, which we're going to get to here in a little bit, and that is change our story about what a threat is in the first place. If we can change that story, we can stop our brain from perceiving that threat and reacting to it. So those are some strategies that we're going to learn. A couple more things I want to talk about here, just to kind of address the elephant in the room. How does everyday stress become burnout or worse? Because I am fully aware that some of you, if you're not there now, you have been at some point this year. Some of you are not in a place where things are just stressful. You might be in a place of burnout. You might be on the brink here. And I want to help normalize that and help you understand from a research and science perspective why that might be. You've been able to manage stress this whole time. Why is COVID really throwing you over the edge? There's a couple of reasons for that. Some of them can be, lack of connection. That's a huge one. Some of them can be lack of resources, lack of tools, et cetera, et cetera. One of the primary things they're seeing in the research lately is lack of connection. That's a big one. And also, when demand upon us exceeds our capacity to manage it, stress becomes what feels like it's cumulative and not something we can manage. And then it could lead to burnout or worse, a mental health crisis. So when demand exceeds capacity, that's when things start to get into that burnout place. And I know all of you have at some point, or maybe even right now, are in a place where it feels like demand is exceeding capacity. Can I help you with the demands? No. I wish I had that magic wand to reduce the amount of demand in your life. To be clear, you are in extraordinary times, and nobody can take away that fact, nor the fact that what's being asked of you is extraordinary, right? So your demands are massive. But what we can play with is your capacity to manage it. Now, again, to normalize things, sometimes no matter what you do, no matter how much you exercise, how great your mindset is, you can meditate an hour every day, sometimes your demands are still going to exceed your capacity, and that's okay, and that's normal. And we need to take action to manage that, which, again, that's what we're doing, is learning these tips and tools. But what we can generally play with is how to increase your capacity. One of the ways we can do that is better understanding our stress. Just like I was saying before, stress awareness, the skill of building stress awareness helps you kind of understand and get to know who are you under stress. Because as you're going to learn in our next webinar, which is such a great one, once you get to know that person, how do you show up? What behaviors, what emotions, what thoughts are in your head when you feel stressed, different than the people around you? You can start to learn what renewal and recovery strategies work best for your stress personality. And you can use that knowledge to increase your capacity to manage the demands you are facing. So I hope that makes sense. We can increase capacity by building stress awareness. And we're going to do that, right? We're going to do that. One of the things that like I was saying, you're going to see some of these during this talk. One of the things we can do is ask yourself, just to get started between now and the next webinar, how do you show up when demand exceeds capacity? What are you giving up? And when I say, what are you giving up? What I mean by that. So how do you show up? What behaviors, what emotions, what thoughts when you feel stressed? So think about that thing you wrote down. What emotions do you feel about it? What thoughts are persistent? The patterns of thought, right? What behaviors do you show? And then what do you give up? When I say, what do you give up? Do you give up sleep? Do you give up exercise? Do you give up positive self-talk? Do you start to have self-doubt and negative self-talk creep in? Do you give up connection and engagement with your family and your loved ones? What do you give up? Do you give up time just for you? So those are questions I want you to think on and reflect on, maybe between now and the next webinar, really get you better prepared for that next webinar. So that was fundamental number 2. Take a deep breath, because I hate this word pivot. It's my least favorite word of 2020, but it is the one that we all can relate to. And I heard Dana using it earlier. We're all pivoting right now. So we're going to pivot between fundamental number 2 and 3. So take a deep breath here. And I'm being a little bit ironic when I'm asking you to pivot between 2 and 3 based on this next concept. So fundamental number 3. If you take nothing from this hour, this is the one thing I want you to take. So heads up, don't miss this, okay? This is probably the most important fundamental that I'm going to cover tonight, because we're going to carry this through all of the webinars, right? So fundamental number 3, we were designed to oscillate between work and recovery. We recover by leveraging our body, mind, and spirit pathways. So I'm going to get to that second sentence in a little bit. Let's focus on the first one. We were designed to oscillate between work and recovery. If you can see that screen, that image in front of you, it looks like a heartbeat. That's on there. It is a heartbeat. That is on there to give you an example of, of a rhythm, natural rhythm of our body. So our heartbeat is a natural rhythm of our body. Blood pumps out of our heart to our extremities and back in. We have a bunch of different rhythms of the body. We have respiration. We breathe in and we breathe out. We have circadian rhythm. We sleep at night and we wake during the day. We have blinking. We have digestion. We have reproduction, all sorts of rhythms. Have you ever heard of the BRAC? It's a rhythm of the body. Basic rest activity cycle. It's also known as your ultradian rhythm. So those of you who are my researchers, I know you're going to go look this up. I wrote it down on the chat. Ultradian rhythm, or BRAC, basic rest activity cycle. This is a rhythm of the brain. It's kind of like circadian rhythm's lesser known cousin. It runs 24 hours a day, and it is a cognition rhythm of the brain. In other words, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, all the time, your brain is running between a series of 90 to 120 minutes of being on, like fully focused and fully engaged in a high performance state. And then it goes into, no matter what, no matter who you are, no matter how much you hustle or push through, it goes into a period of reduced cognitive performance. And it's usually around 20 minutes or so, but it's not this exact like you see it on the screen. This is just an example. So think about it like a phone, right? A phone is fully charged for about 90 to 120 minutes, and then it starts to get this kind of dip. And then what do? Because God forbid our phones die, right? We plug it back in, and then it goes to full performance, and then it dips again when we take it back out. Think of your brain that way. This cognitive peak and reduction in performance runs all day. It's called your BRAC, basic rest activity cycle. If you took nothing away from today, I want you to know this. You can't argue with this. You can't fight it. We oscillate. We should be oscillating all throughout our day in order to match this natural rhythm of the brain. Because generally speaking, what we do is we try to push full force at a full sprint all day long. And we tend to start fighting that BRAC right? We tend to start fighting through when we feel lack of focus, or fighting through when we feel a little bit tired or irritated or disconnected, or however that BRAC shows up for you. My BRAC loves to show up when I'm on back-to-back calls and meetings, and all of a sudden my brain just sort of drifts off into left field, and somebody says, Lauren, what are your thoughts on that? And I'm over here thinking about lunch. That's my BRAC fighting back, right? So you can either work with it or you can work against it. Working against it, what starts to happen? Just like I said, I started to drift off, or however it shows up for you. Another thing that starts to happen is we start to become more susceptible to stress, because our brain is essentially put into a stress response state when we're fighting it, when it's trying to go into that low power mode, right? Or we can work with it. What does working with it look like? What does that look like in reality, in real life? What it looks like, and I'll go back, it looks like working with those natural pathways, that fundamental one, right? Leveraging our body, mind, and spirit by inserting small micro moments of recovery into our day. They don't have to look like 20 minutes long. They can look like tiny moments of recovery. They can be body, mind, or spirit, physical, mental, emotional, spiritual. They can look like a short walk, a stretch, taking a deep breath. Even just taking a deep breath can actually trigger your parasympathetic nervous system and bring you out of a stressful state. It could look like sending a text message to a loved one. It could look like having a healthy snack. It could look like doing a set of squats. It could look like a gratitude check, however you want it to look. The interesting part is the better you get to know yourself under stress, the better you know, remember what I said before, the better you know what recovery strategies work for you. We call those oscillation strategies or recovery strategies. I'll use those terms interchangeably. So when you start to oscillate, you start to increase not just your performance in general, but you increase your ability to manage stress. You're improving your resilience. So if I have any runners in the group, I noticed one person say they were a runner earlier. Think of it this way. If I was to try to go full force throughout my workday at a full-blown sprint, what would happen? I would burn out by first bell, right? By about 10 a.m. It is unsustainable to work at a high pace without any recovery. And that's generally, when you think about your workday these days, that's generally probably what you think about. It is unsustainable. Sprints were meant to be short and intense, but have moments of recovery in between. And likewise, we don't want to treat our workday like a marathon either necessarily. So I saw, Patty, you said it's a marathon, not a sprint. And I'm going to push back on you a little bit there. Yeah. So a marathon implies that we're at sub-peak potential, right? Because in a marathon pace, we're actually running slower than our possible fastest to get through that whole long duration. So I'm actually going to challenge you to reframe your day like this. Treat it like a series of sprints and recoveries. You're going to give your full and best for about 90 to 120 minutes and give yourself a moment of recovery, whatever it looks like for you, whatever works for you. Tempo runs, fartleks, you got it. So I got some runners in the group here, right? And I promise you, based on hundreds of studies that have validated the same thing, your performance will improve. And remember how I define performance. Your ability to show up at your best personally and professionally will improve. Your capacity will expand. Your resilience will go up. You have to figure out what that looks like for you. That's your challenge, right? An ultradian healing response is similar to biofeedback, but it's actually more of a cognitive rhythm of the brain. So it just runs throughout the day, 24 hours a day. So take it away. Oscillation is the key to success, the key to performance. If you want to write that statement down, put it in your on your computer, like on your little computer screen on a Post-it note. Oscillation is the key to high performance. And how can you learn how to oscillate for yourself, right? So I'm actually going to launch a poll real quick, right? Because I'm curious here. When you think about this concept, I know a few of you are pushing back in your head and going, yeah, she doesn't know my day. Well, let's talk that through a little bit. What is your greatest barrier to oscillation? So I'm actually going to launch a poll right now, and I'd like you to give us a little bit of feedback here. This is completely anonymous, and I want you to see, as a group of educators, what is it that you perceive to be the greatest barrier to this concept? Because I want to identify that, and then I want to talk about it with you. So some of us are saying schedule is too busy, negative habits that prevent or deplete energy, right? So maybe eating too much junk food, or not sleeping enough, or too much social media, etc. Lack of support, lack of knowledge, you don't know how to do it. Lack of consistency, I try, but I can't stay consistent. We can solve for that one. Lack of resources, or something else completely that I haven't hit here. So I'm going to give you about, 20 more seconds or so, 30 more seconds. I see that about half of you, a little over half of you have voted, so I'm going to wait a little bit. And someone on the Q&A said, will the recording of this meeting be public at the end of the meeting? I believe they are going to publish the recording, but I will let Shelly answer that one, actually. I'm pretty sure we will be recording this and putting it out there. So I'm about to close this poll. See, about 70% of you have voted. If you haven't voted yet, get your vote in for me. And then I'll show you the results and we can talk about them. What's cool is that what I'm seeing so far, we can address, we can manage. So I'm seeing you slow down a little bit here. I'm going to go ahead and stop the polling. And I'm going to show you your results. The winner was the schedule. Shocking, right? Schedule is just too busy. Negative habits was came in second, that prevent or deplete energy. And then third would be more lack of consistency, being the primary responses to what your greatest barrier for oscillation is. I'm here to push back on you gently. And I want you to start thinking about this. A micro moment of recovery. Let's call it 60 seconds of breathing. If that is too much in your schedule, I'm going to push back on you and say, I don't know if I believe that, right? I know that your schedule is unbelievably busy right now, but I'm challenging you to reframe a little bit what is possible for you. What oscillation strategy works best for you? And I also, and this kind of addresses the lack of consistency and negative habits. And I'll talk to you about this a little bit at the end. I'm a huge proponent of too small to fail. So when we start to try to implement some of these strategies, I really want you to think about what is the smallest amount of next step I can implement. What's the smallest oscillation strategy that's too small to fail that I can implement between now and the next webinar? And I promise you, what that will do is start to change your perception of what is possible and change your perception of what can be consistent. Because if we can get that too small to fail to be consistent, we can start to change our habits a little bit. A lot of times people start too strong and too fast, and that's where they see the sustainability get a little bit weaker. So interesting polling results, and I'm really glad that you shared those. Thank you so much. So we're going to address that. Schedule just too busy. What is too small to fail then? What does that look like to you? I'm going to challenge you to reframe that a little bit. Here's your stop and think for this one. How do you currently oscillate, if at all? And what are the opportunities in your schedule to insert moments of oscillation? No joke, I have had people hide in the bathroom to get their oscillation moment. So if you need to do that, if you need to collect your students and you all take a small deep breath together, whatever works, right? Okay. Fundamental 4, our beliefs drive our behaviors. Remember, I went back to that mind pathway and I was talking to you about what mindset or perspective do you bring to the table? Kind of similar to what I was just saying about re-perceiving what is too small to fail or your schedule being too busy. What beliefs you bring to the table, and I said this before, will significantly determine your experience of stress and your experience of your ability to make changes, meaningful, sustainable changes in your life that will help you better manage what's going on right now. Your beliefs significantly drive your behaviors. When I work with clients one-to-one, this is the first thing we work on, bar none. This is it. We work on their mindset first, because if I can change their mindset and get them to believe that they are able to implement these changes, that they're not too much and too big, that they have the ability to do so, and I can get them to reframe what is bringing them stress, then we can see sustainable behavior change and a greater experience of joy and more Jerry in their life more of the time. Right? Here's a couple of beliefs that I'm going to throw out there that I have seen. These are self-reported from my clients, reposted with permission. But as I'm listing these out, I want you to think about that thing that you wrote before in the beginning. The thing you said was bringing you stress. And I want you to think about what beliefs or mindset do you have about that thing, okay? So here's a couple of really common beliefs that are limiting for people. This can't help me grow. I have to do this alone. I don't want to ask for help. No one can do this better than me. I can't handle this. I hear that a lot. There's not enough of me to go around. I also hear I'm not enough. In a time like this, I don't have time to self-care, exercise, sleep, take weekends off, etc. In other words, I don't have time to carve healthy boundaries. That's what I'm hearing. My family understands why I'm so disengaged right now. Why at the end of the day, I just collapse on the couch and I can't engage in conversation. Rest is unproductive use of my time. My brain can relax when I'm scrolling social media. It's actually the opposite. My team, my students expect me to show up the same way I did before this crisis. So I'll stay up later and work weekends to show I care. Now, I'm not saying these aren't valid. What I'm challenging is that we can re-perceive them. We can reframe these because they are limiting in nature. And so when we can reframe these and take a new perspective, it can completely change your behaviors and your ability to manage stress and crisis with a little bit more energy and what's called a higher locus of control or internal locus of control. In other words, you believe that you have more control over your circumstances. And you start to believe in yourself a little bit more, which I'm sure you know is the term higher self-efficacy as well. When we can change our mindset and identify what beliefs may be holding us back, we can change everything. I'll give you a great example. I have a client who, when we started out, believed that she was too busy to prioritize her sleep. She was getting about 4 to 5 hours of sleep per night, checking her emails all the way up right before bed, scrolling social media a little bit, falling asleep, waking up. What was she doing? Checking her emails again. Well, I can show you gads of science that will show you that the quality and quantity of your sleep will be significantly limited, as will your performance the next day. Your focus, your ability to regulate your emotions, your connection with others, your productivity, it's all going to plummet. And so when I got her to start changing her beliefs about shutting down the screens, shutting down work email at a healthy time, disconnecting truly, she started to prioritize her sleep, and she started to make significantly meaningful changes in her life. Once she started to carve and protect those boundaries, she was much better able to show up the next day and have energy. And then at the end of the day, come home with more energy. She was also better able to hold and protect those oscillation strategies we were talking about. So that's just one way that we were able to shift mindset, shift belief. So as you're thinking about that, kind of some of that reflective challenge I have for you. What mindsets or stories are you bringing to the source of stress that you wrote down, and how can we retell that story? How can we retell it? So I'll leave that for you as something that you can do in that, hopefully in that holiday break, to kind of give you some reflective time and also prepare you for the next couple of webinars. So beliefs can change behavior, And this is your final fundamental. So we've talked about, just to kind of summarize before we tackle this, we've talked about the fact that we are multidimensional beings. We have physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual energy that we draw from, body, mind, and spirit. Our stress, right, is out of our control. It's a biological reaction out of our control, but we can learn how to better respond to it by closing that refractory period and changing our story about what a threat is in the first place. And then we talked about the fact that we can oscillate to improve our energy and our performance across the board. We are meant to oscillate. We are biologically wired to oscillate, and we want to work with that. We also covered that our beliefs significantly influence our behavior. Again, going back to changing that story about what a threat is in the first place. So now we're on our final fundamental, and this one is incredibly important. We are all guided, and I talked about this in the spirit pathway. You see how these are all connected. We are all guided by a deeper sense of purpose, which drives our values, decisions, stories, behaviors, and experiences. Your purpose is your North Star. It anchors you through everything: challenge, storm, and change. When you can figure out not just who you are, but why you are, what is the promise the world made when it made you? And when you can figure that out, and that is a big question, but you can probably get a little bit to the root of it just by thinking about a couple of different questions. When you can get that, it anchors you, and it allows you to make decisions based on and weight against that purpose. It allows you to align your day-to-day actions and behaviors with that purpose. It's kind of like that lighthouse in the middle of a storm, which no matter how crazy the water gets and the storm gets, it always guides you safely back to shore. And if you can, again, some of us have great clarity in this area. Some of us need a little bit more maybe thought prompts and writing prompts, and I'm going to give you those here. Actually, these are them. And some of us have great clarity in this area, and we're just way off course, right? We're way out there in the storm right now. So how can I help you course correct? How can we do that? And that's where these oscillation strategies come in, because at the end of the day, you have to come first. You have to come first. So I have a quick request from you. In that chat, if any of you are super clear on your why, I want you to put one word in that chat to describe it. And I want the rest of you to watch that kind of populate a little bit. What is your why? I'll put in mine: service. I live to serve, starting at home with family, but I live to serve others, to make an impact. And I imagine a lot of you are the same. So when you're looking at that chat, just keep an eye on that. What do you live for? And watch just those words come out. We're going to do a very similar exercise to this in a future webinar that's going to give you goosebumps. It's going to be great. Look at all those varieties. Whatever word that you write in that chat, do me a favor. Put it on a Post-it note and put it on your bathroom mirror. And every morning when you're brushing your teeth, I want you to read that word for the next couple of weeks. And those of you who are still working out, what is it that I live for? Look at those questions that are at the bottom of your screen and think about those and try to come up with a statement. You guys are great. Look at these: community, family, influence, serve, encourage, love, family. So many. I saw someone say advocacy, encouragement, positivity, reach. These are fantastic. Thank you for putting them in. And look at all of the different access points to serving these students. What's most important to different people. It's very, very cool. I can't wait to do we have a kind of boundaries, core values type of webinar. I can't wait to show you what that looks like. Very cool stuff. So that is your final fundamental. And when you can anchor in that purpose and not forget it, let it guide you through the storms. Let it guide you through that thing you wrote down that's really bringing you stress. Change your story about it using this fundamental. And I promise you, it will take care of you. It'll get you through this, right? So a couple of things. I know that's a lot of words. It's actually, I'm putting a lot of stuff on there so that you could take the PDF and look at it later. Couple of ways that you can better oscillate. I mentioned a few before. Reframes, just like we were talking about, mindset shifts, taking a short walk, calendaring in a moment to stretch once per day. Only takes a minute. Focused breathing or box breathing. If you've never heard of box breathing, it's a very cool kind of mindfulness meditation strategy. It's actually used by Navy SEALs. You inhale for 4 counts, make a box, right? You hold for 4 counts, you exhale for 4 counts, and you hold for 4 counts. It is great to use with students. Somebody said that. Yeah, great thing to kind of stop and pause. I know there's a lot of different apps and strategies, but really what we're getting at is breathe, take that deep breath, pack a healthy snack, set your bedtime 30 minutes earlier. Set a timer to list 3 things that you're grateful for to redirect negative thinking. Focus on what can be controlled. Purpose pause. Take a moment to zoom out. Protect time for exercise once a week. Remember, too small to fail. And connection is critical. Maybe send a text to a friend, a loved one, a coworker, whenever you're feeling overwhelmed. Reach out and connect with somebody. It's one of the best possible mental health interventions you can make for yourself. So those are just a couple of things, right? Here is your challenge. I'm giving you a call to action. Write this down. Don't forget, between now and our next webinar, right, which you've got some time here, what is one small change based on our conversation, too small to fail, that you plan to implement right away given this conversation? Why do I keep saying too small to fail? Because the science of behavior change says if you can implement something so small that it's too small to fail, what you're actually beginning to do is the process of neuroplasticity, which is why I have this giant neuron here on the screen. And that process lays the foundation for a new neural pathway that is stronger and more resilient than the behavior, the thought, the emotion that you're trying to replace. Whether it's thinking more positively or learning how to eat healthier or trying to learn how to meditate or trying to be more grateful, or whatever it is, whatever habit you're trying to change, neuroplasticity is the process through which you do that. And the best way you can start is too small to fail. One small thing. So that is your call to action between now and our next webinar. Couple of small things. Starting in January, your incredible district and Dana and team, they have set us up where we will have these webinars periodically. The next one's in January. But we're also going to start having small group coaching huddles. These are the coaches. These are some of my amazing coaches. You'll have a hyperlink to their bios if you want to read them. And they're going to be jumping on calls with just your site at particular times. Actually, I think your site administrators are going to be the ones who will, if you reach out to them, let you know what dates you'll have with them. I believe you're going to have 2. And you'll be able to jump on and brainstorm a lot of these strategies that you're trying to implement in kind of a small group coaching format. It's going to be really cool. They're sort of just going to follow up and support the webinars that we're going to be covering a lot of different topics. So I hope that you take advantage of those as well. This is an incredible opportunity that you're being provided. So I really hope you take your team up on it and your staff, or excuse me, your admin. The next one that we have in terms of our webinars is the Stress Awareness, Stress Personalities, Monday, January 11th, 5:30 to 6:30, same time. Telling you right now, it is the most fun webinar. You're going to love it. You're going to learn a whole lot about yourself and about others. So please don't miss it. I'm going to go ahead and log off. I'm going to stop sharing real quick, but thank you all so much for your time and happy holidays. And I will catch you on the next webinar. Good night, everybody.